14 seconds. Good evening and welcome to the Pompey Politics Podcast.
I'm Ian Tiny Morris.
And I'm Simon Sainsbury.
So welcome, viewers and listeners, another Sunday evening of local political-based fun. Oh, and Simon is having all sorts of fun we've got a new technical setup today, so hopefully everything's coming through loud and clear. For those of you who are close watchers of Simon's hairstyle, he's keeping it particularly close so that he can't tear it out any more than he has been doing all week. So is it all looking good there on the technical desk, Simon?
Well, as far as I can tell, yes. So.
Which is the old, either it's working okay or you're in blissful ignorance that it's not. So our focus this evening is the last full council before the gloves come off and we go into the full duking it out on May the 4th.
Yes. So Tuesday was the last full council before May's local elections. 14 councillors up for re-election out of the 42, it was a bit of a mixed bag, to be honest with you.
Well, obviously following on from last week and the budget meeting where everyone seemed to hug each other, sing Kumbaya and have a generally warm and loving tone. It's was that just an outbreak for one meeting, or I think there was surprising general consensus on a number of issues in this meeting as well.
Indeed, there were quite a few things that were literally just kind of waved through at the start of the agenda. But once we got into the notices of motion, even there was a surprising outbreak of consensus and agreement. Not that everybody liked that idea.
No, I mean last week. So again, we'll have to look carefully at this point as to whether it is the positive, warm bonhomie of collaborative politics, or in my grumpy world, whether it's everybody just going, yeah, whatever. So we will digest it with our laser-like analysis, which is what hopefully our listeners and viewers have come to expect. So you've got the agenda in front of you, Simon. Where should we start?
Well, we could start by looking at the fact that some of the things that kind of waved through, we may well come into in a bit of detail later on. But the things that were the notices of motion, so where there was some where those came in, that the first of those was about the council being unhappy about Tesco supermarkets removing their recycling facilities from their stores in the city, and that causing problems. Everybody seemed to be pretty much in agreement that they were really unhappy about that. Didn't like that idea and called on Tesco basically to sort their stuff out, bearing in mind, I think it was £2.8 billion of profits, which is about a 36% increase on the previous year. They can probably afford to be part of the solution as they're part of the problem. So quite a cross-party agreement on that one.
Yeah. And I struggle with this a bit because they've been unhappy with Tesco before. I think they when Tesco gave notice that they were taking these things away. I guess it is this interesting concept, isn't it? That if somebody sells you the product, they're partially responsible for cleaning up after you've finished with it. And I'm not sure that I kind of ascribe to that logic, even though they're making decent enough profits. Or possibly very, very decent profits. But there's an element of I'm still not quite sure that, I have an array of bins outside my house where I can recycle almost everything. And the only thing I had to ever go to Tesco's for to recycle anything was, I guess it would have been bottles and the occasional clothes. So was there any consideration that perhaps as the council takes pretty much everything else away, those kind of missing elements are something they should be doing rather than leaving it to the good people of Stockwell and Cohen?
I don't think that was that seemed to be kind of the view, really. I think the view is that there's changes coming ahead with the Environment Act, which is going to help facilitate some things to do with recycling policies and help perhaps standardise some recycling requirements. Councillor Atkins pointed out about the differences between councils about what can and can't be recycled, and maybe there's an element of the council needing to get its own house in order before it starts criticising Tesco about this issue. But nonetheless, it's there is headway on the idea of several local authorities within Hampshire, although we're not obviously within Hampshire under Hampshire County Council. There are still some things where it's sensible for us to cooperate and work in partnership with other local authorities in the region. And there'll be a new MRF, which is, if memory serves, a material material. I can't remember what the E is. Recycling facility. So someone's about to tell me into what that is, but that will enable us to
Elephant?
No, not elephant.
No.
No.
Right.
But it will enable the council to do curbside glass collections. So everyone will get a separate container to be able to put their glass in. So that's just another container for us to have. But it means that finally we'll be able to do those, because up until now we haven't been able to do those at curbside because there isn't a way to collect those and then separate those back out when they get to the facility to where they're processed. So yeah, really good. Good to see that recycling facilities are going to be the ability to recycle is going to increase. Councillor Charlotte Gerarda pointed out that Portsmouth has one of the lowest recycling rates in the city. The administration pointed out that we have one of the lowest rates of using landfill at only 4%. So you can talk about the numbers all you like, but I guess at the end of the day, some of these things require action from central government to standardise what materials are used in packaging and therefore make them easy to recycle, because not all of them are. And therefore, that's the kind of widespread spread. So, yeah. So everybody hated the idea that Tesco had taken the recycling bins away. They applauded the idea that the council has put a recycling bin over the road from Tesco in Fratton. They're looking to do something similar at Port Solent, and basically watch this space.
Cool. So Tesco's bad, recycling good. We all agree.
Yes.
Ring the bell. Next motion.
So one of the other ones that got a look there was about safe spaces. So a motion raised by Charlotte Gerarda and Susie Horton, where they talked about there was a motion brought to council in December last year, and they worked together to actually improve the original motion that had been put forward. But essentially, lots of young people are reporting that they're feeling unsafe on their, basically when they're going from A to B, when they're going to and from school, for example, and some of their parents are really quite concerned about those safety issues, quite a concern about the issues or risks of county lines and things like that. So essentially, this motion is talking about teeing up with schools, making sure that there's better awareness of what information is available on the council's website, and if need be, organising safe spaces where young people can go to if they feel that they are threatened or they feel that they're unsafe, that there's somewhere actually that they can go to be safe, so that the fear perhaps of actually something happening doesn't stop them actually going about their normal business and living their lives with the freedoms perhaps that we enjoyed.
Yeah, and for me, no issues with that at all. That for me seems like good sense. And again, a collaborative motion proposed by the Reds and the Yellows. So yeah, I can't see anyone objecting to that. So we will ring the bell and move that one on as quickly as the first. Nobody's bad in that obviously, apart from the county line drugs gangs who are inexorably bad. But yes, this is all seeming rather collaborative and good sense at this point.
The recycling thing was motion was carried, and that, by the way, was raised by Council Leader Gerald Vernon Jackson and Councillor George Madrick from PIP. And the safe spaces was unanimously agreed. It would be, I'm sure, it would be hard to find anyone in the council that thinks that young people shouldn't have safe spaces. We then kind of diverge a little bit with regards to where people had consensus and agreement. The next thing that we wanted to look at, so we're going a little bit out of order here for anybody that's actually got the agenda in front of them, and if they have, good for you.
Well done.
Yes,
That's
done.
extra credit.
You've done some homework.
So
the Stop the Knock motion was brought forward by councillors Cal Corkery and Kirsty Meller, with the raising the issue.
Who are our two independent, non-Portsmouth independents?
Yes, they're both ex-Labour councillors, and indeed Councillor Cal Corkery will be joining us next week on the show. So it'd be lovely to have him on again and to hear what he's got to say about his time as a councillor and his experiences and what he wants for the future for Charles Dickens. The ward, that is, not obviously the writer.
Yeah. Now, before you dive into this, Simon, with my almost encyclopedic but rubbish knowledge of things that have gone before, I think this has been brought before.
So
the whole Stop the Knock.
Well, so there was a motion last year, and indeed Councillor Heaney mentions that this was brought up last year, but that was raised. There were concerns there raised under one of the standing orders that if you're bringing a motion to council that identifies basically a change of policy that causes expenditure, that you need to identify where that money's coming from. You can't just bring things to council and say the council should spend the council should spend loads of money on, I don't know, painting curbsides yellow. I don't know. But you've got to find out where that money's coming from. So, but this motion doesn't actually say the council has to do X or Y. It's asking basically the cabinet to consider doing certain things, and therefore that's how this was A, different from the original motion, and B, obviously was allowed on that basis. But there's So should we listen to what the councillors had to say on that one?
Yep, let's do that.
Okay.
So too many Portsmouth households live in constant fear of bailiffs knocking their door. The poorest and most vulnerable do suffer disproportionately from debt issues, and the local authority should not be actively adding to their woes. 1 in 2 adults with debts has a mental health problem. 1 in 4 people with a mental health problem is also in debt. Debt can cause and be caused by mental health problems. Those on the lowest incomes in our city used to be eligible for council tax support of up to 100% of their liability. However, this level of support was cut in 2016, so now even the poorest have to pay at least 20% of their council tax bill. Debts owed to councils often end up in court, and council tax is the only debt where a debtor can be sentenced to a custodial sentence for non-payment. There is divergence between local authorities regarding how affordability is assessed and appropriate repayment plans are calculated. The Standard Financial Statement produced by the Money and Pension Service provides a consistent, fair and industry-recognised method of working out affordable repayments for residents in financial difficulty. So what we're asking Council to do is to support the Money Advice Trust campaign called Stop the Knock, which would then call on Council to firstly make a clear public commitment to reduce the Council's use of bailiff overtime. Secondly, to review the Council's signposting to free debt advice, including phone and online channels. Third, to adopt the Standard Financial Statement to objectively assess affordability. Fourth, to review the formal policy covering indebted residents in vulnerable circumstances. Fifth, to consider following examples set by other local authorities by exempting council tax support recipients from bailiff action. And lastly, to sign the Citizens Advice and Local Government Association Council Tax Protocol. So now moving on to the briefing note that has been prepared for the leader and, as I understand, circulated at his request. Say, for example, if we'd asked the money advisors employed by our local housing offices who deal with people in debt on a daily basis and are kind of accredited to provide specialist money and debt advice, I think we probably would have a very different form of analysis before us. This motion and this campaign is not about whether to collect, it's about how to collect and how enforcement actions should be pursued if there are then issues where people fall into arrears.
The note that Councillor Corkery refers to from the Section 151 officer says, and I quote, "The likely additional cost of these measures is not addressed within the notice of motion." Under our rules, that means that the notice of motion should fall. And we could very easily say no to debating it today. That would be wrong. We're interested in any way in which we can try and help. Councillor Corkery talks about the situation in 2019. Since then, referrals to enforcement agents have fallen by 56%. We want to work with people so that we can actually provide a decent service that is tailored to individual need, not necessarily tailored to a campaign that is 4 years old.
I'd like to take this opportunity to share with the Chamber 4 case studies that myself and Councillor Corkery have actually dealt with. Mr X is a disabled resident with severe mental health issues. He told us that on one day last week, the bailiffs visited or called him 6 times in one day. He has repeatedly told them he is going through the process of getting a debt relief order and he doesn't have the money to pay them, but they are continuing to contact him in a way that he now feels constitutes harassment. Portsmouth City Council bailiffs have requested that Mrs B pay back £189.17 per month. This amount is unaffordable and is pushing her further into debt. She is struggling to make ends meet. She is a single mum to 2 children and is in receipt of universal credit. Mrs D was also being visited by bailiffs during COVID lockdown in relation to a council tax debt, despite being vulnerable and shielding. The bailiffs had previously requested £150 from her next carer's allowance payment and £150 from her next universal credit payment, which is clearly unaffordable. She called the council to try and arrange a payment plan, but was directed to contact the bailiffs again. Also during lockdown, Mr Y called us about a council tax debt which had been passed to bailiffs who were visiting his home regularly during lockdown, which he was concerned about as he has a disabled son who was vulnerable. He told me he has repeatedly tried to come to affordable arrangements with the bailiffs, but they kept on rejecting his offers and insisting on amounts which he couldn't afford. More should be done to ensure the highest possible ethical standards are being upheld and that vulnerable people on low incomes are not harassed for money they do not have.
When we get a note sent to us on Monday, I got it at 10:51. It says, "Dear Councillor, the leaders asked me to prepare a briefing on the above motion for all councillors. I've attached this for you so you can consider it in advance of the council meeting tomorrow." The briefing was actually written on the 9th of March, and I was just a little surprised we were given it on the Monday before the meeting. Councillor Sanders made some comments about the content, basically implying that the motion is all about letting everyone off from any debts, and that's what the motion is saying. Well, look, it doesn't say that. Well, that's what you were saying, and you're shaking your head at me, but that's what you were saying. You said anyone who's got any debts could be let off on the basis of this motion. But it's not what it says. It quotes some statistics about debt and debt recovery, but it doesn't actually say that it asks for anyone to be taken off debt recovery. So all of the things that Councillor Corkery have been asking for are, in a sense, asking the Cabinet to consider, because we can't mandate the Cabinet to do anything. We can ask the Cabinet to do something. So why don't they just accept the motion and just review it and then come back with their decisions about what they wish to do?
My fear is it presumes that somehow people won't have to pay their council tax dues. And I think that's not the right message that needs to come out from the council. When I've talked to people, the problem that people get in is they get into levels of unmanageable debt. Actually, having bailiffs being involved means for people that they're able to prioritise and organise their debt in the way that CAB and others would want them to do. So the problem is with people who just ignore debt, and it builds and builds and builds, and then it becomes unmanageable.
Everyone is individual. Everyone does have situations whereby they have different reasons why they're in debt. They have different reasons why it's got to the bailiff point. And it's an unfortunate reality, but people are individuals and people do make choices that are sometimes very, very unwise.
I think it may sound to residents perhaps listening or viewing, dare I say, that it sounds as if we've got quite a cold take on how we deal with people that fall into hardship. If people are in crisis and they're coming to their councillors, we're the people that can signpost them and hold their hand and say, we'll help you, but you also have to help us as well.
So yeah, quite a few contributions there from Councillor Cal Corkery, Darren Sanders, Kirsty Miller, Graham Heaney, Gerald Vernon Jackson, and Matthew Winnington, and then Rob New. So quite a bit of views there on kind of both sides. But yeah, it seems that the administration had released a briefing document on the Monday just before the council meeting, citing some things which they felt meant that perhaps that the motion wasn't as necessary. But then, in the end, they proposed their own amendment to it, which changed two words in the actual motion to consider. Or review. So essentially, again, reinforcing what Cal was saying, which was that the motion was about actually asking the council and the cabinet to review its policy on this issue, which the amendment was subsumed, and then the motion was voted through anyway.
This one troubles me because I think there was some semantics in the debate or the excerpts that we heard, and I think Rob New struck the nail on the head at the end there, which is that people who find themselves in hardship, it is in the council's interest to work with them. It is in all the councillors' interest to work with them, and for a debt to be passed to a bailiff, there didn't seem to me to be any acknowledgement that that only happens once the dialogue has broken down between the debtor and the council. So, the first part of the ask, which was to reduce or to actively reduce the amount that are being passed to bailiffs. Well, I think that's a no, I think everyone would agree with that, because at the end of the day, bailiff's role is to recover debt. That's what they do. That's how they get paid. And whilst that might be considered unsavoury by some, ultimately, this is, what we're talking about here is people who have not, for whatever reason, paid their council tax. And I guess there is a bit of me that says, well, how much is this motion about, saying, well, not really your fault, couldn't be helped, low income, et cetera, go on then. And I really struggle with that conceptually.
But I think that's the point of the disagreement and the debate that occurred in the chamber, was that wasn't what the motion was suggesting. The motion was calling on the council to follow some standardised processes on assessing affordability, and to review how it signposts people to help that's available, and to make sure that the bailiffs that are acting on its behalf are indeed actually looking at affordability rather than just rather than effectively strong-arming people into paying their overdue council tax. I don't. The motion wasn't saying people shouldn't pay their council tax. It was challenging the method by which and the ethical nature of the conversation that should be taking place with vulnerable people to make sure that conversation isn't creating a further vulnerability, pushing them further into debt and causing distress. Those examples that the councillors stated. Sorry, go on.
Yeah, no, and I absolutely get that, Simon. I think the challenge is that as I said, once a debt has reached a bailiff, that will be because dialogue, and the council has control at that point over all the discussions around affordability and all those discussions around, you know, because ultimately it's in everyone's interest to come to a mutually agreeable solution, isn't it? And people can't pay you if they don't have the money. That's the simple fact. It doesn't matter what you do. But the flip side to that coin is when a bailiff knocks the door, there are almost nobody who has a bailiff knocking at their door is going to take oh, go on, you've got me then. Let me just take out this big wad of notes and count off the money that I owe you, and then you'll go away. Well, if they do, then they really are rather foolish. So I think that there does have to be that middle ground. I think it's about where we draw that line. And for me, as much as the council can do to make sure, particularly, those affordability calculations do need to be dynamic because, what was affordable 12 months ago, particularly if you're on a low income and you're, once you paid for the basics of the shopping and everything else, let's be honest, those kind of very basic living costs, once you paid for your heating and your lighting and your food for the week, that's taking a much bigger chunk of your wages or income or whatever you want to describe it as than last year. So I think, for me, there does have to be a look at those rules. They do have to be dynamic and they have to change, in line with a very fast-paced changing environment. I think the bit for me is that, once you've reached the point of enforcement with the bailiffs involved, there is an element of, I think we can agree that that's a lose for everyone apart from the bailiffs who, understandably are going to want an amount of that money for going to recover it. So yeah, I mean, review it, good. My view is that, whatever the council can do to strengthen its position to stop the arrangement getting into the hands of the bailiffs, they need to do. Once it's in the hands of the bailiffs, can you really tell a bailiff not to upset somebody by going and asking them for the money that they owe and they have refused or have been unable to pay? I'm not certain you can.
Yeah, but those two responses of you'd take different courses of action, wouldn't you? Because there's a difference between someone refusing to pay and someone being unable to pay. And I think that's the fundamental difference is that the motion is asking for the consideration of how that happens and how to review that on that basis. So that one, the amendment was subsumed and the motion passed because. As Councillor Heaney said, the council doesn't have the power to direct the cabinet to make a decision in that regard. So all they can do is agree that the cabinet should review it and therefore make a decision in due course.
Yeah.
And look at it in that way. So yeah, that was the stop the knock. So one of the other ones right at the end, towards the end of the meeting was in the members' questions section.
Oh, I'm trying to remember who was it? Who did? Was this fireworks? Shouldn't we have?
Yeah, I was wondering whether you were going to launch into a bit of Katy Perry there.
Katy Perry. I was going to go for Ella Goulding. Good knowledge. Yeah, Katy Perry. Yes. Fireworks. Absolute Portsmouth institution. King George V playing fields. Cosham. One of the few things that the lords and masters in the south, the few crumbs they sweep off their table for us pariahs in the north. Oh, it's a majestic thing full of beauty and wondrousness. And they're going to take it away because they hate us. I think that's pretty much the motion, wasn't it? For the question? Or have I over paraphrased?
I think you might have overplayed it a little bit, but let's see how that question went.
Can he confirm whether or not the much loved fireworks display will return to the KG5 fireworks, KG5 playing fields after the development work on the football site is finished?
Whilst the open space for the fireworks firing zone and the safety zone remain, it is the feeling of the events team that there will not now be adequate space to enable the large numbers of attendees to safely watch and egress the event, particularly given the growth in numbers since COVID and recent rather scary experiences, particularly at last year's event, where despite all best practice being employed and proper advice given, families were choosing to cross the very busy main road and not use the designated crossing points. The police raised concerns with us about that after the event. As members will be aware, the fireworks display is just one of a number of events that takes place at the site, and discussions will occur with the events team or any other event organisers who do wish to use this site to consider the feasibility and layout of activities going forward. We absolutely recognise the relationship between the annual city firework display and its historic delivery in the north of the city, and we will seek to make sure that this event remains in the north of the city going forward. Because of the increasing footfall at Cosham, it has made it very difficult to accommodate everyone from the south of the city who floods up to the north of the city for that event. So I've asked for a feasibility to take place to look at holding 2 simultaneous fireworks events on the appropriate date, one in the south of the city and one in the north of the city. Once we've looked at that feasibility, and it's going on at the moment, we will then review the likely numbers that we feel would attend an event in the north of the city and see whether that could safely be accommodated at KG5. If it can't be, we pledge to find an alternative location in the north of the city in discussion with ward councillors to make sure that the event remains in the north, and we will continue to pursue a simultaneous event in the south of the city. In terms of sustainability, lots of people jumping in their cars and flooding north, the huge amount of footfall on the site, the potential damage that it causes to the grass up there and its playability then as sports pitches afterwards at a very difficult time of year. Remember, we had to reschedule the event last year because it was so wet, it wasn't safe to put the infrastructure on the site, that we feel that it's worth exploring whether there are better alternatives. One, to be able to guarantee that the event can go ahead on the planned date, because obviously rescheduling incurs further cost, but also to make sure that we can do that in a way that's accessible and safe for local residents.
Oh.
So not quite the... so really okay, we need to think about this one, because things have changed, it's getting too busy, rather than having everyone having half the city schlep their way up to the north of the city. Isn't that possibly a good idea?
Yes, I think the key and part of the reason why this has broken out into a full social media scuffle is that the question was asked last March,
yes.
And I think Ben Dowling was in position at the time, that was, will these new AstroTurf pitches have any effect on the King George V playing field fireworks display? And I think he gave assurances that they would not. But I guess, I think Steve he commented in the evening news that perhaps Ben didn't have the full facts in front of him at the time. And I guess when Steve's explained that there, part of the rationale, the fact that they need to move, isn't just about the pitches. It is, or what was postulated there, is that the event had almost become too large for the King George V playing fields to host it. So yeah, I think it is a challenge, Simon. I think there is an element of, one of the challenges I think with putting anything on is there is an element of, well, I don't like it. So, I've lived in Cosham for 20 years now. I think I've been to the fireworks display twice now. Obviously, it's a visual display, so it's not my thing. I took our kids there. But there's an element of, I never really minded it going on, but it's one day a year, isn't it? And if I look at the football, the football pitches and what's been done there, well, I'm not a footballer either, but I can at least recognise that that will be a community resource that will be used, every weekend pretty much during a number of evenings during the week, and is going to be a facility for for kind of lots of different folk, with everything that comes with it. So I think it is bad. It's I don't know how long the Portsmouth used to be the IBM fireworks have been running for, but it's a good long while.
I don't know how long they've been running, but yeah, I mean you're right on the background, and Councillor Steve Pitt was at pains to explain and apologise for that at the start of his response, that's how they'd kind of got to that situation, and the best thing that he could do now would be to be really clear, really transparent and honest about what the options were. But what he'd identified was that if the events team was saying it's not going to work because it's too big, obviously you making the ground smaller isn't going to help that, but it's now too big for it to be safe anyway. So instead he's looking at alternative ways to be able to achieve that. And councillors Lee Mason and Matthew Atkins, Conservative councillors in Cosham, both expressed their dismay and pretty much feeling that they'd been lied to by officers and Steve's predecessor, that despite seeking repeated assurances, the assurances have actually turned out not to be accurate, and therefore that's not something that was covered in the consultations, not something that people have considered. And Cosham is, as I think as Councillor Atkins said, there was that. It's ideally located from a transport perspective. It's very close to the train station. You've got good bus links there. You've got the parking facility at Lakeside nearby. So in that respect, it's actually quite a good location. And the other locations that you might consider aren't necessarily going to have as good transport links, or will require other arrangements to help people get there without them all schlepping up there in their cars. But again, if you're dividing the demand by two, then maybe that won't be as big of a problem.
Yeah, and that's the bit that I really, again, I don't know what the demographic data is on that, and I doubt it exists, because, we have big housing, conurbations in Cosham, in Wimmering, in Paulsgrove, that are all kind of pretty much walking distance from, King George V, and there is that element of, I don't know. I don't know how many of the good people of Eastney and Craneswater and and Southsea and everything. I don't know how many of them are jumping on the train or driving up to take part in that. I guess time will tell. But yeah, I think the challenge that as you've highlighted there, whichever site is identified, again, we know the local geography reasonably well. And I can't think of another site that isn't, doesn't have the same challenge. It isn't as well placed in terms of parking and rail links, and that's where that sort of challenge comes in terms of those big open spaces in the north of the city. There's Farlington Marshes, there's Rugby Camp. Please God, don't let them put 10,000 people on the rugby pitches there, grubby enough as they are. So yeah, I think we've got to let this one run, Simon, and see what comes up next. But I think whatever comes up is going to be suboptimal compared to the King George V option.
Well, but again, that's presuming that obviously the option to the idea to have two simultaneous displays means that the demand will be reduced enough that it makes King George V viable still. So all in the hands of that feasibility study that Councillor Pitt was talking about. So I'm sure we'll get to hear about that in due course. If not from the council, if not from the Evening News, certainly from someone's leaflets over the course of the next few weeks. I'm sure it'll come up. So
there needs to be a bar chart.
There needs to be a bar chart. Do we know anyone that's good at bar charts?
No. Right, next. Next on the agenda.
So the next thing we wanted to look at was actually we wanted to go back to some of the things. So early on in the agenda, there were about 3 different items that were essentially just the way through. There was an ability to debate some of them, but they weren't actually open for vote anyway. But they were there for information purposes. And one of those things was about council tax premium on second homes. So, so this stems out of basically some changing legislation that's coming up from the Levelling Up and Regeneration Bill that's currently having its second reading through the House of Lords. So it's now at committee stage where detailed line-by-line discussion of amendments takes place. And what this piece of legislation would allow councils to do would be to charge up to 100% premium of council tax on second homes, and also charge basically a 100% premium on substantially unfurnished empty property. I'm not quite sure how you define substantially unfurnished. Properties that have been such for 1 to 5 years. It's currently about 2 to 5 years, but there's essentially a rising scale for those unfurnished empty properties or substantially unfurnished empty properties of it being 200% if it's over 5 years and 300% if it's over 10 years. So yeah, there's some big things there. The empty properties, for example, you're looking at the current figures. The report says that, the second homes would net the council an extra £2 million in council tax, bearing in mind that the budget for next year is about 94. And the empty properties, bearing in mind, obviously, if it comes into force, it would only be the first year because you can't start the clock from before the legislation, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
So the properties that have been empty for more than a year but less than 2 years, that would be about £447,000. So quite a substantial addition to the council's coffers if they're able to do that. But the interesting thing about the proposed legislation is that it requires councils to basically to announce 12 months before the start of the financial year in which they intend to levy the charge. So, say, for example, the council decided that on April the 1st, not April Fool, but on April the 1st, that they needed to, they were going to announce that they were intending to use this, the facility to levy these extra charges to the owners of these properties. That wouldn't come into effect until the financial year of 24-25, and in order for that to happen, the legislation needs to receive royal assent by the end of this month.
Ooh.
And if it doesn't,
So we're on a
it goes back another financial year.
Yeah. So this is an interesting one, isn't it? Because the first thing that sort of has me raising an eyebrow is I hadn't seen this piece of legislation reported widely, and very interesting that the Tories, who only want to help the rich, and that as part of that levelling up agenda, have put forward a piece of legislation which effectively, is a stealth tax on people who either have holiday homes and or have purchased properties solely to sit there and fold their arms and wait for the value to rise as a property investment. So an interesting political point there. For me, this makes good sense, because I guess, if you do own a 3-bedroom luxury penthouse in Gunwharf Quays, then the kind of muse on whether you can afford to pay double council tax on that is probably not one you have to think about for too long. And £2.5 million, that is, from memory, when we did the sums looking at the council tax rise, that 3% that or 2.99% that it went up was about 2.7 million, wasn't it?
Yeah, you're right. Basically, each percentage rise in the council tax that was voted through at the budget last month it is effectively £902,000 worth of revenue. So to avoid that those percentage increases, the council either needed to find savings of a similar amount, or to find other sources of income. So yeah, that's quite a substantial amount. I think it works out that had, for example, those this legislation be already on the books and the council being able to enact it for start charging people this from April the 1st this year, so next month, the council tax base amount would have only needed to have risen by about 0.3%.
Interesting. I guess the thing will be whether this is one of those taxes that yields you revenue or changes behaviour. You know, so there is an element of we could see a flood of properties coming onto the market. I guess if they're, you know, rental or investment properties that are empty, which people could be living in, that's probably no bad thing. But no, I can see why they approved this one. So in the interest of time, we'll ring the bell on this one. And what have we got on the agenda next?
So, so the next thing was the report about the anaerobic digester plan. So that's basically the council looking into the feasibility of setting up a piece of equipment that enables it to process the food waste that's collected from people's properties, and essentially turn that into fertiliser and to biogas, and that gas is then piped into the national grid for people to use in their homes as they would with gas that's that comes from fossil fuels. So the council's been looking at this since 2020, working with and informing Hampshire County Council and other local authorities in the area. In summer 2020, they identified one site, but could understand that they needed to look for more than one site. They identified another second site in autumn 2020, but it wasn't owned by Portsmouth City Council, and undertook a feasibility study for gas grid connection and for alternative uses should the anaerobic digester not secure planning permission. And then in February 2021, they identified a third site and again performed topographical studies, gas grid connections, technical drawings, etc. But then in March 2021, the first site was discounted as unusable. And the second site was discounted as the purchase price makes the scheme unviable. So summer 2021, they've submitted pre-planning application to Hampshire County Council and submitted capital bid for the funding for the ongoing investigations. So it's still kind of cooking, but if that is something that could be set up and owned by Portsmouth City Council, that would effectively be something they can charge other local authorities for the cost of using. So that might, in the end, be a potential revenue stream, as well as being something that's better for the environment than having gas that's drilled up from the North Sea, and having food that basically just decomposes or is just burnt off at the incinerator.
Yeah, it seems like a good idea. I guess it's that the old do the numbers stack up? And I think the other thing for me, which when I looked at this as part of this, it's like, you know, the wheels turn so bloody slowly, don't they? You know, well, we've been looking at this for 2 years, and can we have some more money to look at it some more? And then we'll talk about planning permission. And, you know, you can absolutely bet your left leg to an acre of Swedes that when they announce where it is, it will not be met with joy and anticipation by local residents, because although it is, as you say, an anaerobic digester rather than an incinerator, those lorries full of food waste have got to get to the place, offload their food waste and head off again. So, you know, that feels like it's going to be, you know, they'll announce where it is, everyone will go mad, there'll be a public consultation inquiry. Yeah, I don't see this one coming online much before 2030. So I think we can all nod and wave at it, but it doesn't feel like it. If this is the cavalry to help start weaning ourselves off of natural gas, it's I don't think it's anywhere near the top of the hill at the moment, Simon.
No, and it might be one that maybe we revisit later when we have the Inquisitor Jerry Brown back on the show to look at all things council investments. So definitely worth getting into the detail on that one. But no, it's not going to happen overnight. No, to be honest, no project of that scale is going to, is it? Yeah. So another thing that was on there was about the pay policy settlement. So the council is required to publish the ratio between its median salary and its highest salaries. and it's given some various figures about what that is. So at Portsmouth City Council, the median is £24,401. That means that 50% of the staff earn a salary above that amount, and 50% of them below that amount. The ratio for PCC is 6.83 based on figures in March 2022. The previous year, the ratio was 7.21. And the median was 22,500. So the ratio's gone down a bit, but the median's also gone up. Other councils by comparison: Buckinghamshire 6.69, Cornwall 6.5, Thurrock 6.3, Milton Keynes 6.2, Reading 5.9, West Sussex 5.69, Oxford 4.5. So we seem to be coming in at a higher ratio than those. And just to give you kind of some idea of the bandings of the high wages that we're talking about, the chief exec, wages spanning between 151 and 166,000. Port director and upper grade director. Don't forget, obviously, the port is owned by the city council. 113 to 123,000. A director of lower scale, 97 to 107, and a senior manager, 84 to 92. So. Very skilled workers, obviously in high demand. But it's, I don't know. To me, bit of the stats kind of head on it. I'd kind of want to see how the distribution of the different wages works out, and how that kind of pans out.
Yeah, I mean, for me, very interesting figures, and I always think with these ratios, the devil is actually in the detail. And you know, when I look at those pay bands, it does, you know, I think the days of the claims that, you know, again, local authority pay is poor by comparison to the private sector, I'm not certain that still holds true when you look at those numbers. You know, there is an element of you know, 80,000 plus for a senior manager, not even at director level. You know, those are the kind of numbers which gets people frothing at the mouth in terms of MP salaries. You know, and it'd be very interesting to know just how many dozens of those that we have amongst Portsmouth City Council. So for me, when I look at these ratios, you know, there's only two. There are many ways to manipulate those figures, aren't there? And one of the interesting things for me is that if you want to push that median salary up, one of the best things you can do is outsource all of those lower salary jobs. So, you know, any sort of cleaning staff, carers, you know, the gardeners, the refuse collectors, you know, let's if we outsource all of those, that'll move that median salary up, and you know, that'll take care of business. Now, I guess the question with all of these is, you know, well, and so what? You know, does that make any difference to the people who are earning what they're earning in, you know, at the moment for their role? No, I don't think it does. You know, you could put a pay freeze on your top executives. Well, yeah, that would help. You know, because for me, if I look at the encouraging number in that, the fact that the median salary has gone up, you know, all by the shouting 10% since last year. Well, you know, that if we assume that all things have stayed the same, well, that says that the lowest paid have seen their wages increase almost in line with inflation. So,
well,
yeah.
On that note, PCC agreed to follow the living wage from July 2022, which increased. So that increased to. So it's increasing, in May 2023 to £10.90 an hour, which is £21,029 an annum for a 37-hour week.
Yep.
So from May, so it's good to see that the wages on the lower end of the scale are going up. And while I guess it's easy to say, crikey, that's a hell of a lot of money, but the truth is we've seen the issues in areas like planning where the council doesn't pay as much as other local authorities do, and we're struggling to retain staff with the experience that help planning applications process. So you know, when you're, you know, if you don't follow what the market demands, then you're going to struggle to secure the best possible people.
Absolutely, and I think that that's where, you know, when you look at these ratios and things, I think sometimes they're interesting, but the story just from the numbers alone isn't as clear as some people might think it tells you. So we are thundering through the agenda. It's 22. What have we got left?
So the last thing that we wanted to look at was the motion about Southern Water, and that again was one where unanimity overwhelmed the chamber. There was an amendment from the Labour group to insert into the motion that came from. So the original motion was from Councillor Kimberly Barrett and oh, sorry, I've forgotten who else it was from, and Councillor Adair. It's the amendment was to insert basically the requirement for Southern Water to be looking at the impact of human medicines that are being basically passed through us into the watercourse via their treatment plants, because it's not something that they treat for or attempt to remove, and the impact that that's having on the ecosystem and marine life. So quite some serious things. We've had Professor Alex Ford on the show before to talk to us about things like that. We've had people from Stop the Sewage Southsea, from people from the from Hailing Against Sewage on, and the harbour partnership also been on the show and talking about this. But fundamentally, this motion is calling again on we need to keep an eye on Southern Water because they're not keeping their promises. The council have had to spend £35,000 putting up signs just to warn people about sadly the stuff that's in the sea that's been dumped into the sea by Southern Water, and everybody seemed to be in universal agreement that that's rubbish. They should clear up their own mess. But any suggestion that Southern Water should have control over what goes onto the boards, or that it should have their branding on it, seems a bit laughable and a bit untrustworthy. But yeah, there was a breakout of various people saying how little that they trust what the water company says, and also Graham Healy pointed out that with the industry privatised in 1989 without debts from its previous operation, but Southern Water in particular as a litany, as a charge sheet that would make most repeat criminals blush.
And I think that is, that's absolutely key in this discussion, is that Southern Water has no shame. And, it's not that long ago that they were fined £90 million. And I think you had written down somewhere that the judge's summing up of them, if that was in a criminal case, that summing up would be before a sentence of somebody being sent down for 20, 30 years. It would be a case of...
it was something that Graham Heaney quoted. It was, these offences show a shocking and wholesale disregard for the environment, for the precious and delicate ecosystems and coastlines, for human health, and for fisheries and other businesses operating in coastal waters. He goes on to say that the company has a history of criminal activity for its previous and persistent pollution of the environment, with 168 previous offences and cautions, but ignored these and not altered its behaviour. Like you say, in any other industry, in any other company, they'd be being wound up, and the directors would be finding themselves on the sharp end of a prison sentence.
Yeah, no, and I think for me, if that was the building industry and disregard of health and safety legislation, the directors would go to prison. And there is an element of, I think we can vehemently agree on this, that Southern Water are a disgrace. And I think that we are in that situation where this has to change, and there is an element of I think all parties are saying this simply isn't good enough, and I think it is something which again, I can't get my head around. We've covered it a number of times where, I do not understand how, you can fine a company £90 million and, they then plead poverty that they haven't got enough money to undertake the works to fix the problem, yet they're still paying shareholders hundreds of millions of pounds. There is this element where, and this is where, I'm pro-business, but with something like Southern Water, I would, if they announce profits of £130 million next year, I'd have them back in court and I'd fine them £130 million, and there would be an element, and I'm going to keep doing that until you fix the problem, because the problems are soluble. They're not difficult. They're expensive, they're time consuming, but they're not difficult. So yes, vehement agreement to end the show.
Yes, and indeed the amendment was subsumed, and everybody was in agreement that basically, for want of a better word, Southern Water need to sort their shit out. So yeah, charging us for the privilege of pumping our own sewage back at us is not really what we're paying them for.
Absolutely. So looking ahead to next week, we have Councillor Cal Corkery on. I am really looking forward to the episode. Cal's been a friend of the podcast for a number of years and always gives us a very interesting and heartfelt perspective on his views on politics and local affairs. So I think that one is going to be an absolute humdinger, Simon. So yeah, make sure that everybody tunes in next week. You don't want to miss that one.
Yeah, indeed do. And my apologies for the correction. It was the Southern Water was proposed by Kimberly Barrett and seconded by Abdul Qadir. But yes, but join us 6:27 next Sunday when we've got Cal on. And don't forget, we'll be lining up hustings for the local elections. So if you're a candidate in the local elections in Portsmouth, please do get in touch with us. Either message us on Facebook or email us at studio@pppodcast.uk, and we'd love to hear from you, and we'll get organising some hustings.
Brilliant. You've been listening to the Pompey Politics Podcast. I've been Ian Tiny Morris.
And I've been Simon Sainsbury.